Okay. Welcome, welcome. I believe we should be recording. Uh this is Archetypal Hour. My name is Adam for those joining for the first time. Um this is a space where we really talk about archetypes. The the sort of shapes, the patterns, the forms, the archetypal processes, the archetypal images. One way to think of it, we've had different definitions, and I hope every space here, maybe we have new definitions and new ways of pointing to what we're trying to point to with this. But sort of like maybe the shapes and forms patterns behind the things that we might see, right? The things that recur, especially when we think about the rhythmic, cyclical nature of time as opposed to just the linear time. Um, And we always like to ground this in sort of what's happening now. So the hope is that while talking about archetypes and archetypal things can get kind of just purely mental or purely abstract, and perhaps in some ways they are sort of thought forms first, maybe is one thing that we've discussed before, although that's not something that I think there's consensus on, which I like, right? It's a different, we're still trying to figure some of that out. But um but I hope that that this is grounded in sort of practical life. So like when we think about the archetypes here, I hope we're finding ways to talk about archetypes that we find to be either alive within us or alive in our culture or alive in the world as we're experiencing it now, or maybe archetypes that we want to enliven. Um, and so I'm hoping this is a space to do that, to kind of discuss some of those shapes, patterns, those archetypes that have maybe brought us here in our journey, or that feel like they're right there with us right now, or that maybe we feel like they're on their way, that potential. I think in a past container, we talked a little bit about this idea of like, there's this ever present now, the shared now across all sort of everything. Um, and then there's this, these present events where we have the past events and past shapes of things sort of steering a lot of things, or I could say um informing intelligence of all different kinds, human and non-human intelligence based on past. And then there's also these shapes and patterns of probability that are happening, that are coming from the future, for lack of a better word. And so there's this meeting, these events where past and future are colliding into an event. And I think we've said before here that like it could be kind of like in particle physics, right? They talk about a particle being in superposition until it's observed. Well, that's kind of like an event, right? Of something that might exist in several different possibilities until it's observed, until it happens. And when that happens, all that's the past that led it there is also colliding with all the potential that exists. Anyway, so I think the hope is that this space is about all of that intersection, past, present, future, and archetypes, and that feels very relevant for today because it is New Year's Eve, 2023, and tomorrow will be 2024. For those who are into numerology, I've seen a lot of people discussing on social media that 2023 in numerology would be a 7 year, which some traditions, especially the Yodish tradition, combined with numerology, would call a Ketu year. So the South Node in that lineage astrologically, which is a lot about letting go, about tapping into ancestral and instinctual. Um, Ketu is the second part of the demon in the great story about the turning of the cosmic ocean that went after the Amrita, the elixir of life, and had used deception to do that. And then Vishnu, who had also used deception um, to turn into the Mohini, the beautiful form of Vishnu, the goddess form of the feminine form of Vishnu. And he attracted them both, and then he had sliced them in half, right? And so the head became Rahu, the tail became Ketu. the two sides of the nodes, which are responsible for the eclipses in the tradition. But anyway, so 2023 was supposedly a year of K2, and 2024, according to numerology again, is the number eight, an 8 year, which is infinity, eternity, and it is connected with Saturn, interestingly. Saturn. And so it's an interesting jump if you were to. Mohini is huge for me. Ooh, I would love to hear more, Hoda, that Mohini is a really, because that's not one that gets discussed a lot, actually. But I've seen some people even like use Mohini as a way to like help with misogyny or help with modern Indians dealing with like trans things and stuff like that. We're like, remember Vishnu also was a woman too, and they're like, wait, that's too much. But I saw that on social media, and I was like laughing at someone telling a story about how they were using Mohini to try to like speak to their uncles about gender issues now. But yeah, Hoda, that's a story that you love. Thank you for sharing that. Actually, funny enough, I should take a picture. Let me take a quick picture. I had put it on my wish list a long time ago, and had almost forgotten about it. But I'm gonna just excuse the background because I just took it down for 1 second. But I just wanted to show off kind of dark where he is. Maybe I'll try it. Actually, no, that's nice too. Let me just do it. Yeah. Sorry, I was just taking a picture. I can post this later on Alter. But I got this new Vishnu idol, which I'm really, really excited about. And I had literally like because I had put this on my Amazon wish list so long ago, I had almost forgotten it was there. So for me, it felt like a real surprise. Like, whoa, Vishnu's coming to me right before the new year, and it just feels right. It feels right, especially with what I was just saying about Saturn and eight. You know, Saturn. A lot of people I've heard talking about it online. I'm curious what you all think. I know Saturn comes up a lot in these containers, so please share all gnosis you have on this, or if this aligns. But a lot of people are saying, well, this is an 8 year 2024. Eight's about Saturn, and so they really see it as a maybe if last year was about letting go of stuff like K2 does, right, and getting down to what's the core and instinctual. Now with eight with Saturn, there's some limitation there always with Saturn, but with Saturn it's also about hard work, putting the work in. So I've seen other people and starting to feel I'm feeling it myself. I have to admit, I'm feeling a sense of like, yeah, this is a year of work. This is a year of building. This is a year of this is a year of doing the things that might not be pleasant, but that will reap benefits. Beautiful. So for those listening to the recording, both Lexi and Hoda are saying that some of this messaging aligns. I'm curious if any of you want to say a little bit more about what particularly is sort of standing out or what you're feeling right now in this moment, thinking about how this Saturnian energy might want to express in your life or in the collective in the coming new year. Mm. Hoda says, feels like I'm being guided to focus more. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yes. Like on making what's immaterial material. Ooh. What's making immaterial material. Yes. And I can see how that sort of greater focus, this transition from immaterial to material, you could see how that Saturnian energy could be really beneficial and necessary and required to facilitate a process like that. Mm, mm. It's kind of funny. For some reason, thinking about Saturn with this transition from immaterial to material, it also isn't it funny how like to make anything material, like think about a dream or an idea you have. Once you start actually putting it to life. Like I have this idea for a story, now I got to make it a real story. There's automatically a limitation because somehow in your mind, when it's more immaterial or in your spirit, it can embody lots of different things at once. It's like we were saying before about the potential, right? It's like when it's in that immaterial form, there's so many swirling types of potential that are overlapping. I could go this direction, I could go that direction. And they kind of can exist sometimes, depending on your mind and your conceptualization. They can kind of coexist peacefully. Once you actually go to turn it into something, to take form, taking material form is inherently limiting, which of course you could extrapolate to, just taking a incarnation, right, as a spirit and becoming a human. But I think I'm just really being drawn to that with this, what you're saying, making immaterial material with Saturn, where it's like, yeah, there's a limitation there, like, and that's a limitation that we have to accept. And yeah, it's just sort of built into it. Like, we don't want to fight against it. Like, that's a limitation that actually can be really beneficial because Saturn, I think what I love about Saturn energy is, yes, it can be harsh and cold and difficult and limiting, but if you stick with Saturn, it always pays off. It always pays off. 222 here, it says Hoda. Beautiful. Mm, just letting that sit for a second. Yeah, so yeah, I love what you're saying about how like that Saturn energy and making what's immaterial material. Like, yeah, we're gonna have to make some choices, and we're gonna lose some stuff, lose some potentialities when we make choices, and that's okay. That's part of this process. There's going to be a benefit because once it becomes immaterial, there's those material benefits that come. Um, and I think it also helps with the immaterial side too. I think there's something clarifying about actually seeing what works or doesn't work in practice versus just it being sort of an abstract theory or just a dream. Like, no, let's see what this thing actually can look like when it's like, out in the world. Lexi says, I feel like for me, the last 2 years, I've had to do a lot of inner work and learn to develop right relationship with the immaterial so that I can create authentically from a centered place in the material in 2024 and beyond. Dang, that's beautiful. Ooh, I honestly feel like, yeah, that's so funny, Lexi, because I feel like I've been going through something very similar along a similar time frame. A little less than 2 years from me, I would say, like in a very intense way, but around that same time, interesting. I've had to do a lot of inner work and learn to develop right relationship with the immaterial so that I can create authentically from a centered place in the material. I'm just wanting to repeat that again, Lexi, because this is really, um, yeah, this is really aligned for me. And this feels so like resonant with how I've been feeling too, where I do think you're right. Like, because there's this beautiful interplay between the immaterial and the material. But the immaterial, especially for those of us that maybe weren't as used to it or grew up with certain traditions that taught us how dangerous the immaterial is, um, there's a lot of fear that we had to overcome. At least for me, I don't know what your journey looked like, Lexi. I'm sure it was multifaceted. And if you want to speak to more of it, I would love to hear it. But I'll just say for me, like there was also multifaceted too. But one of the big ones that's coming up for me right now, thinking about it, is fear. The fear of the immaterial and the fear of tapping into more of it, that I really had to work through a lot. And I had to scare myself a little bit, had to sometimes go further than I thought or allow more in than I thought was safe. And whether or not that was the right call, I don't know because it's just was the way it unfolded. I'm grateful I'm not a teacher, so I can just do it my way and see how it works. And I'm not trying to guide anyone else at this point in my life because yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot through that process. And you're so right, though. I feel like when you do go through your own process and and I love the phrase that you use, right relationship. Like when you find that right relationship with that immaterial side, um, it is so vast. And especially as you said, like I also love this phrase, create authentically, right? Creating from like that those deeper parts of us where now we're really welcoming in more of ourselves into the creative process, whatever it is that we're creating, whether it's just new ways of being or art or a business or a garden, whatever it is. Alexi says, I think before working on and with the immaterial, I had fear and other karma relating to both the material and immaterial that I couldn't really do anything. And over time, I guess I lost desire and life force to want to do anything. In parentheses, it relates to atrophy and demiurge for me. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting to use that phrase, that word life force too. Mm, yeah. Yeah, it's a very difficult thing. You are so right. Like if if we're not careful, yeah, we just lose that life force. We lose that desire. You are so right. And when we're in fear, especially fear of death or fear of other sort of painful things that might happen, like in a fear state, we do lose the ability to have access to our life force. You are so right about that. And so I'm so glad that you were able to find a process and people and other ways that worked for you, that you were able to work through some of that fear, come to terms with some of that karma, or see the karma in a different perspective, and be able to refine some of that desire and life force. Thank you. Wow. And Hoda earlier said she saw there was a huge eagle in the sky. Dude, I love all the Hoda bird sinks. I feel like bird they just stay in that field for you, Hoda. I love that. And also, if I'm not mistaken, you and several other people here also, correct me if I'm wrong, there had been some conversations I saw when I've been lurking in the many threads about the avian sort of uh, sky ancestry. So I don't know if that's something that has come up in here, but I'm just couldn't help but think about it. That's really interesting to see that. Yeah, aligns. Okay. I love I forget which tradition it is, but I know there's a couple traditions where like the birds were the ones that actually taught language to the humans. Um, blue, green, and red avian here with the salute in the chat. And I don't know much about this. If you're willing to come off and talk about it, I would love to hear more, but only if you're willing to. Um, because I think because in my mind I have certain avian sort of like the archetype of avian, right? The archetype of bird is a very specific thing just from like my perceiving as a human right on earth living, but I'm curious what that looks like from a gnosis standpoint, for you feeling or not feeling but knowing and having that inner knowing of this connection. But what little I've read um about this group is this there's a lot of what I've read was about unitary consciousness. Again, that's just one thing as a attribute that was related to my understanding of that. But please, I'd love it's so complex. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Another day sounds great. Yeah, this feels like one of those things that is so big that it doesn't really it would be kind of doing it not justice probably to kind of bring it in. Thank you. So that's something that maybe that could be a separate thing. I would love to just learn more about that. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful to see, to just it's just cool to see that because I just think the birds like and every one of your containers you can always hear them in the background. It's amazing. They want to get their stuff in too. They're like, hey, we're just not the only bird out here transmitting, okay? We got some stuff too. Listen to us too. But they're adding. It's all in harmony with your message always. At least that's how I interpret it and feel it. Um, yeah, I had a couple different ideas for today, but I really curious before I jump in to kind of some of the stuff I had in my mind. I'm curious for both of you. Um, the sort of that question that we've asked in several of these containers of like, what do those archetypes feel especially alive or especially relevant? to you in this current moment? Whether like literally, like this current moment, like right now, but also just this current moment in terms of this transition between new years, according to one calendar at least. Um, yeah. And also we're in the winter, we're in Sagittarius season. Jupiter is direct, which I have to admit, I don't, you never know what it's impossible to know for sure, but I will just say my mood feels different today. There is a different sense. Um, and I don't know if it's just because Jupiter's direct, but it feels really important to me right now. But I'm curious. Oh my god, me too, says Hoda. Yeah, it's Venus is in Sagittarius too. Hmm. Whew. Yeah, there's been a lot of movement in Sagittarius lately also. I feel uplifted as fuck, she says. That's how I kind of felt too. Like I was like, whoa, what's this like? What is it? It was almost like because I'm someone who's very Jupiterian, so I feel like that goes Jupiter. I feel like has had an outsized influence on the way that I show up in the world and the way I see things. In the sidereal, I'm a Pisces rising. In both sidereal and tropical, I'm a Sagittarius moon and Ketu. Uh, and they're both in prominent houses. The 10th house for moon and the first house for. So anyway, Jupiter is a big deal to me. But like, yeah, like just like you're saying, like what you said, uplifted was the word you used. Like I was like, wait, what is this optimism I'm feeling? Like, yeah, like I talked about with Saturn doing the work. Like, I swear, even a couple weeks ago, I'm like, yeah, but I don't really want to work. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I was like I knew it was important, but I was like, at my job and different things, I'm like, I wish I had that spark. I'm kind of meh. Today, I was like, oh yeah, let's do the things. Let's put some work in. And I was like, is that you, Jupiter, helping? Lexi says, I've been fasting and feeling more peaceful the last few days. That's beautiful. Hmm. Hmm. And thinking about sort of, so we have, it seems like there's some astrological, cosmic, weather changes that the three of us are finding beneficial at the moment. I'm curious what archetypes are kind of active in your field right now. um, Either calling you or and by calling you, it could just be as gentle as interests. Like I just wanted to go down this rabbit hole and study this, or I wanted to look at this, or I wanted to pray in this way, or yeah, this image or this thing really stood out to me. I'm just curious what sort of is showing up, what has been showing up in your field. Um, yeah, that feels especially relevant for you right now, if you are willing to share. I'm just holding space as people type. Ah, Hoda says, I woke up thinking of Nefertum and Horus. Would you like to, if I know you're driving, so it might be tricky, but if you'd like to come off of mute and say a little bit more about sort of what that felt like or what came up, please do. But no worries if you're not in the mood or unable to. Ooh, she says it felt super playful. And I pulled over for gas. Ah, that explains why you're able to type. Now, playful is nice. As you all know, that's one of my favorite vibes. That's like, talk about, I think I've called it before, like a skeleton key to the cosmos play. Mm. Ooh, and I saw an Eye of Horus sticker first thing this morning. Mm. Yeah, that Eye of Horus is such a powerful image. Oh, thank you. She was saying she liked the skeleton key to the cosmos for play. Um, Yeah, there's something about the Eye of Horus. It's so funny. I haven't really studied this very much. I haven't felt the call to the. I've talked about this in other containers that I'm learning a lot about the Kemetic wisdom and tradition and imagery from you all. And so I don't know a lot about it. I'm learning, but I will just say there's something about that particular Eye of Horus image that is really quite like when you've yeah, it's hard to describe. You ever, you guys, I'm sure you have, but like I'm curious if there's other images, but like sometimes a certain image, it's just you just look at it and you're like, whoa, it's doing something. Like I'm not aware of what it's doing, I'm not necessarily coming with like clean gnosis of what's happening, but you can feel activity below the surface. Does that make sense to anyone? Like there's something stirring. I don't know what it is, but there's something about a certain image or a certain archetype. Yeah, definitely. Okay, thanks, Soda. Lexi says, Hermit to Magician archetype has been in my field again recently. Uh, in parentheses, I forget at the moment if Hoda mentioned it in Archetypal Hour container or a different kind of container before. Yeah, it definitely sounds familiar, but it might have been a field tuning or. But I think we did mention it briefly though. But I love that this. Yeah, the Hermit to Magician. Now that has been something you guys have mentioned before, but I'm curious if there's anything more you want to say about. Now I'm curious for you, like, do you feel like Lexi, like this is yeah, this feels like a progression to you, sort of like a hermit moving into the magician archetype. And is that something that you feel sort of relates to processes happening within you right now, or maybe that you're seeing? I'm just curious if you want to share more about that, or Hoda too, because I know this is something that you guys have discussed too. But this is a really interesting transition, or this hermit to magician. Mm. I just laughed because I just remembered I was like with my tarot cards, just sitting looking at 'em, and something came up where like for some reason I had this theory for a second, and I haven't really played with it, but that the hermit might be the fool in a much older form. But I think it's an interesting idea to maybe consider this relationship of the magician and the hermit. There is something very interesting about the two. Very interesting. It's also interesting too because like thinking about these two together, like you think of the magician, and laid out in front of the magician is like all the elements, right? He's got the sword, the wand, the cup, the pentacle. They're all at his disposal. The up, he's got one finger up and one finger down, right? He's as above, so below. He's got the Ouroboros wrapped around his his waist. So like it's a very like full command, right? Whereas the hermit, he has his staff holding him up, so that could be considered a wand. And then he had that lantern with the star. And that star feels so related to me to the star tarot archetype as well. And I don't know. Sorry, I'm kind of I'm lost in it. I'm speaking out loud right now, so forgive me because I don't know where I'm going. Um, but I just find there's a lot of interesting. It's an interesting transition, but to me, it feels very related to what you were saying, Lexi, a little bit about how you had to do the inner work in order to make the material to build your relationship with the immaterial for the material standpoint, whereas like the hermit is like going into this isolated journey. He's just got this lantern of this star, and then after going in and whether he found the star, that's the question. Did he find the star through his travels, or did he leave with the star? Maybe if he found the star, that would be an interesting progression, right? To sort of say like, oh, now I'm coming back up, and now I'm really ready to manifest. The magician, to be able to now I've found my sort of my cosmic roots, my sky ancestral, my where my eros comes from. That kind of imagery is coming up for me, and now I want to go use the tools of the magician. Um, hmm. Yeah, I'm curious if any of that lines up. I'm going to read what Lexi says a little earlier. I feel like it could be physically true for me because I've always felt kind of hermit like in a way, but I feel like my external life is changing a bit. And also, I feel like it's true for me internally, like taking my ordinary experiences and alchemizing them for cosmic timelines. Ooh, taking my ordinary experiences and alchemizing them for cosmic timelines. Dang, that's powerful. And Hoda said, I found the star, feels so aligned, cosmic roots. Yes. Hermit to magician. That's beautiful. And since the magician is coming later in the progression, I kind of have been tuning into that aspect of the magician that's more about like, I guess what's often called like manifestation. I'm curious what aspects of the magician feel especially alive or fruitful for you, Lexi. And Hoda, if you have any other thoughts that are coming up as we think about this hermit to magician, I would love to hear them. Just holding space as thoughts might come up and find their expression. Okay. Thanks, Hoda. Says nothing at this moment, but as stuff arises. And as I've shared before in prior containers, please cut me off. Even if I'm in the middle of a thought, please cut me off. I really want to make sure I don't like these containers being mostly my voice. And Lexi's typing, so I just wanted to hear about the magician. Mm, yes, okay. She says maybe in relation to creating things for me at the moment. Yes. Yeah, that feels like again, I didn't want to put that out there if that wasn't what was most salient for you or most sort of relevant or present for you, but yeah, that to me that's like the strongest, most evocative part of that magician is just like he's got everything splayed out on the table like, listen, whatever we got to do, I got all the tools of the trade to do this. Mm. But what the magician, I don't know what's coming, why this is coming up, but like what the magician has to have, right, is intention, has to have will. And that feels related to that hermit, to that star lantern and that staff. I don't know why. They feel related. Where if I the more I think about this hermit to magician, the more I think about this need to go in to find that inner light, to find that golden staff that you can really lean on. Because a staff is powerful. I remember it's funny, we started a new thread about coaching, and I had a coach once described to me like what they thought coaching should look like. And they said like a lot of coaches think that their job is to show someone a map of where to go, and they're like, no, that's just consulting, right? That's just telling them where to go. Like coaching is really more about being a walking staff, because a walking staff is something you can lean on, something you can poke stuff with, to see if it's safe, to see if you can walk, right? But it's not something that actually leads anywhere. It's just a support for you on your journey, but it's not leading you anywhere like a magnet leads someone. And that a good coach really shouldn't be leading someone anywhere other than their own self-directed map that's coming from within their own psyche, within their own soul, within their own very essence and core. Anyway, for some reason that came up to me in thinking of that the hermit's staff, and I don't in my head I don't know. Let me see if that's actually the case, but in my head his staff is golden in the Rider Waite Smith uh image. I'm just gonna check that out if I'm actually correct. Just of course when I'm looking for it with my actual deck, it's gonna be like the last place I look for him. Where are you, Hermit? Oh my gosh, I'm going through all my favorites here, but yeah, there's the magician. See if anything else pops out while we're still talking about the magician. Yeah, no, his staff is golden in most of the versions, or at least in the version I have. He has a golden staff and then this golden star within the lantern. Beautiful imagery. Thank you so much, Lexi. Hoda, I'm wondering if you have anything before I start sharing anything that's coming up from me in terms of any archetypes or shapes that are shaping, forms that are forming. Oh, no, our pleasure. Thank you so much, Lexi, for sharing. Thank you, Hoda. Said not right now. I'll admit, like I've been doing a lot of. I still have been um, in the underworld. I think the last several months have been very underworld heavy. Between Anana's descent, which we talked about a lot in other containers, and then last container, I told the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, and I've been reading this book by James Hillman called The Dream in the Underworld, and it's been fascinating so far. But the Greek pantheon features heavy in it, and I would say that that pantheon, that sort of collection of deities and mythology, has been really prominent in my field lately. Um, and I'm not really sure why, but I had a conversation with Nobu, and I almost forget the actual specifics of what this conversation was, but something about that conversation with him, and it was like roughly about Western civilization, Western kind of thinking, that kind of idea, and how I think in the past that in conversation with him, I've shared like I think there is something that could be beautiful about this impulse that I've seen in Western traditions of like sort of taking wisdom from all over the world and integrating it, right? In a like that there could be some good stuff there. But what's happened, of course, is the Roman Empire, right, is what it became, and then the American Empire, like it became about totalizing, totalitarianism, right, homogenizing, um, systematizing, um, at the exclusion of other things that didn't fit. So maybe some things got syncretized, right, and then all the stuff that couldn't get syncretized appropriately was called evil or this or that or uncivilized or barbarous or all the different terms, right, that this tradition uses. And so anyway, that was a conversation, and you know, and he got me thinking, like as someone who is, I have Irish and Italian ancestry. I'm American, raised in American culture, which I do see as very related to sort of Western culture, and it did make me think like lately, why the Greek mythology, the Greek understanding coming to me more in my field lately, and I'm starting to realize that similar to how some of these conversations came up, and when we read like the Parmenides on Nature poem about um, this idea that like once you get away from just what is and start naming everything, that the names that you give things, which like in all these traditions, especially we'll just stick with the Greeks, right? The gods and goddesses are also abstract terms, right? And so that's one of the quotes that this Hillman book says, like mythology is psychology of the ancient time, and psychology is basically mythology of the modern time, right? Which makes total sense to me. They're the same thing. Um, and these gods are there to represent abstractions. Anyway, it was just getting me to think about how these stories that we like relegate to like what they call like the Western canon, or like, oh, Homer the Iliad, like these are just stories you read for literature's sake. I don't think I'm starting to feel more and more like, especially those of us who are European ancestry and want to be involved in helping make the world a better place. I think some of us, and I'm feeling the call myself, have a role to play in um I don't know, rewriting some of these myths. And I know that's language that we use in the culture way. This idea of like creating new narratives and new myths. I'm really feeling that lately, and I'm really feeling like there's something powerful about sort of because like you look at ancient times, like even like some of the stuff I've read about the switch from like the Vedic gods and how that Vedic wisdom and deities ended up sort of help found all these different traditions, right? Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Hinduism, with these roots, and how over time, like you have Rudra as a storm god, but as the Indian culture progressed and needed to be more, in households, Shiva gets married, right? Shiva learns yoga. Then Shiva gets married and has a household. So like the gods are also kind of they're as above, so below, right? And so it made me think like, we've the Greek gods, these ancient Greek gods that are actually at the foundation of Western thought, whether we believe it or not. I think Westerners have fooled themselves into thinking that like, oh, we've like we're all logic and empirical, but it's all still a foundation of ancient Greek religion in many ways, and ancient Roman religion, and then Christianity. Once Christianity becomes their whole Roman Empire's religion. Anyway, these things are sort of static. And what if some of us had the audacity to, because it's our lineage potentially, right? Like to update some of these myths for a new era because they're undergirding a lot of the pain and they're undergirding a lot of the things that have caused so much pain in the world. Well, we can update these myths and write new endings to them and write new stories and resolve some of these storylines astrally in the hopes that maybe that will facilitate their actual resolving in material. Um, I don't know. Does that make any sense to anyone? I kind of just went off for like a little bit there, so thank you for letting me sort of think out loud. And I don't know where this is coming from, but that's what's in my field lately. Hoda says yes, and glad you said it. Yeah, I mean it's a really interesting question that comes up, and I think a lot of it's radical but real. Yeah, and especially radical with like the root, right? Like I think yeah, I mean, it depends on your how you see your reality. Like, I think for a while when I was super materialistic and empiricist, I saw all change as fundamentally about changing political policy, right? And so I went down that rabbit hole big time. And I mean, you need to change policy in order for things to change. But in many ways, I'm starting to think, well, a lot of policy is downstream of culture, which is downstream of myth, which is downstream of narrative. Um, and Western culture is in a bad shape. And but maybe some of us can help by creating new myths, like Zeus, right? No one ever took over Zeus, other than I guess the new gods. Christ took over Zeus essentially, right? But something about Christ, how can Christ coexist with a new pantheon? Is maybe a question for Western for Western people. Uh, or how does that myth how do we sort of use some of this yeah, basically what myths can help us tie up the loose ends? It's like sorry, I'm just rambling today, but the social media, like on social media you'll see a lot of people, like I remember during the pandemic there were a lot of jokes about how like reality is getting lazy, the storylines are making no sense, like especially during the Trump era where it was like, what's going on with the writers of reality? Like, there's a lot of jokes like this because a lot of us we live in the era of binge watching TV and Netflix, and that's the chief commodity of the United States, right? Is entertainment and distraction. And um, so there were a lot of conversation about that, and it's just making me like wonder what would that look like for us to take that a little bit more seriously. Like, yeah, the stories that we do tell do actually create reality in many ways. And the myths that are undergirding a lot of Western principles, they're not in good shape. Like if we want to fix our principles, we have to kind of fix some of the mythic quality of it. And there's actually like I think I shared this post. There's this person I follow on YouTube who I really like, but he was using a lot of Jean Gebser, who is a French philosopher, and Jean Gebser talked about like these sort of stages of human consciousness evolving from like archaic, which I'm gonna do a horrible job at this, so forgive me. I'm very much a layperson and not a scholar, so I'm just sort of being totally honest with that. Um, and so take everything I say very with a grain of salt. But Jean Gebser like had the stages of consciousness, and the first one was sort of he called like archaic, which was basically like the earliest humans that really maybe didn't make a distinction between like the whole us and them, this idea of like, oh, there's humans and then there's other things outside of it that the archaic human would not have. There's no distinction. It's like a baby that doesn't know that they're different from their mother. That kind of a sort of stage of consciousness. Like, and in many ways, a lot of us trying to get back to some of that archaic thinking of, you know, this is all one thing. We're all Earth consciousness. But anyway, so this jump from archaic to magical, and then to the mythic, and so the magical is like a more the two-dimensional thing, and with the mythical you start getting into these storylines, and then that's when you start getting duality and polarity, and then under kind of beyond that is this rational or mental um, plane where everything's about empiricism, rationalism, where the logos starts to take over a little bit more, and then integral is what he calls the sort of stage that we're in. And anyway, the reason why I'm saying all this, I think, um, is to try to get under that radar, to get a little bit closer to the root, down to some of the rewriting some of the myths. Um, that in order for us to fix some of the way that we're thinking about things, and for some new possibilities to come in, that new myths are required. Um, yeah, I'm just gonna let that sit for a second. But for some reason, the question I'm curious for you that I wanted that's coming up is sort of like, who's gonna take over from Zeus, right? Because like in the Hindu tradition, I mean, in many ways, Indra is still considered the king, but not the king of the gods. But now a lot of language around Indra was he's the king of the lesser gods, right? Whereas the Trimurti, Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu are sort of more in charge, or depending on the sex, right? The Vaishnavas would say Vishnu is sort of supreme. The Shaivites would say Shiva, and then the Shaktyites, right? Where actually no Shakti, the Ma Shakti, in all of her forms and all the infinite aspects of the goddess is the supreme reality. Um, but that sort of they have now sort of in the in that understanding, they have taken over from Indra, right? Who has taken over from Varuna, just like how Zeus took over from Uranus in the Greek pantheon. And so I guess the question for me was like, yeah, who's going to take over from Zeus now, right? Who is it our turn on the Western side to write some new stories of that dethronement or maybe that humbling of Zeus? Like, what does that look like? I feel like we're still kind of in the era of Zeus in many ways, but I do think Christ is Jesus is an archetype that can really, and a deity that can point us to maybe some way. But I do think there's something else. There's new things, and now I'm just gonna stop because now I'm just rambling, and I really wish one of you all would come off mute and cut me off desperately. Um, but yeah, so that's been in my field a lot, and I'm thinking about what that looks like in 2024, what that looks like to try to see what new myths or what ways the story can find its resolution that might have some beautiful effects in the material side of the house with the astral. And I think, as you mentioned, Hoda, I mean, Lexi, I think so much depends on us cleaning up our own inner worlds, um, and what that allows to come forward and allows to come into existence in the material when we do that. What new possibilities are we able to now see when our fields are less distorted or when our fields are more authentic? Thank you, Lexi, for that affirmation. But yeah, anything coming up for you all as I went through my little ramblings? And if not, just anything else that's coming up for you, I would love to hear it. I see some typing, so I'm gonna hold some space. Mm. Hoda saying that she really appreciated what was said about Zeus being dismembered a little bit. It feels healthy, honestly. Yeah, I'm really grateful to hear that. I'm really grateful to hear that. And I don't even really know what that will look like, but I feel like I'm really grateful for you to affirm that there feels like there's some juice there as I continue to play with this. Oh, interesting. Came up and she says it came up in another conversation earlier today, so this is synchronous for me. That is very interesting that it came up. I'm open to Uranus to come back to the stage with a or even Neptune. Ah, that's really interesting. These are interesting ideas. Healed versions, of course. Yeah. Like, what would that look like? A healed Uranus or a healed um uh Poseidon or Neptune. Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, this is gonna sound really crazy, but this book that I'm reading, like I said, the Underworld, the Dream in the Underworld, they had some really fascinating things about the connection between Zeus and Hades, who are also brothers. Just like Poseidon, Neptune is a brother too. And Hades is a fascinating. That's a fascinating thing too. I feel like almost like the kingdom of Hades has to be reconciled. I feel like I do feel like there's a sense I have sometimes that there's something about the underworld is important right now for what comes next. And I don't know what else to say about that. But it's really interesting to hear you say um, that maybe a return to Uranus might make sense, or what might appeal Neptune or Poseidon. Yeah, rebirth. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Zeus thing, like, what? Because now I'm thinking of Artemis. There's so many. And like there are legends, like some of the Orphic stuff I've read said that um the ideal some of it said that Zeus wanted um Dionysus to succeed him. And there's a lot of interesting connections between Dionysus and Jesus, actually. Um Not a total overlap, but there is interesting, very interesting connections between Dionysus and Jesus. And Dionysus is a really interesting figure, a bit divisive too. Um, but an interesting one. I love what you say about Artemis though. And she's been coming up a lot in the broom and in the pot. Yeah. But there's so many people. And I mean, no matter what, if we were to just like have fun for a moment and say, hey, what are some new narratives that could really be healing and restorative? Um, I do think there'd be some healing, restorative work if there was narratives written about Zeus actually giving up his throne. Like, what would that look like? You know, it's sort of so out of character for Zeus. So much of Zeus and Indra, who is very, I think they're very related, and there's this idea of like this Proto-Indo-European, where a lot of this stuff might have gotten its roots, and many would say also there's Atlantean stuff, and you know more about that, Hoda. So maybe there's some Atlantean mythology that needs to be, or astral stories that need to be resolved. Zeus Succession sounds like a fire series. It does, and it feels very timely. Maybe Percy Jackson's gonna do something. I don't know. I haven't watched that or read those books, but I do find it interesting that the Greek stuff is in the and then obviously the Marvel movies have some Norse gods, and now they have some Greek pieces. Yeah, they're it's really interesting to see them the gods coming back. And Neil Gaiman, he had that series about American gods, and there was a TV show where the old gods were clashing with the new gods. I didn't actually watch that. Hoda, You like that, so that was a great but, like, I found that like, I didn't watch the show yet or read the books, but I literally just went down a rabbit hole of reading the story, like, the plot one, like, years ago, because I was like, "Whoa, what is this?" Sometimes I've done that. I've read more plots in Wikipedia than I've read books, sadly, because sometimes I'm just curious about the archetype. Like, what is the structure of the story? I'm just so obsessed with, like, what is this? Okay, I'll experience it, like, the actual story one day maybe, but, like, I just wanna see what's the thing that it's pointing to? Like, what and I was amazed at that story about the idea of, like, I think it was entertainment was a god? In American God, like this idea of like these new things becoming gods, which makes so much sense, right? Because like, of course, in ancient times, you're gonna have a god like Aphrodite, like desire is gonna, yeah, of course, you can see how that runs the world. Media, perfect. But like nowadays, of course, media is a god, and of course, that's a newer invention of the American astral gods, right? That media is it's this huge, and it's kind of, and it's a consuming entity, like it's a powerful deity. Like, wow. Oh my gosh, y'all, I will stream this show if need be. So maybe we'll have a watch party because I think like again, I haven't watched the series, but just reading the outline of it, it feels so important to me. That's the kind of work I'm pointing to. Like we need to create some new stories, some new and I think what that feels like it's coming from a more cynical place, at least the way I've seen the commercials, right? Which is again is there's a place for that too. There's something about again, all good stories are pointing us to the now. There's no such thing as the past or the future and all that. It's all now, and all good stories point us to the now. And there's a good reason to be cynical about all the sort of astral heavyweights that are pushing for our attention. But I think there is power in us working on new fiction, new astralizing new deities, or giving them more and less, that can really be healing, powerful healing entities as well in a co-creative way. Lexi says, I've been kind of tuning into what feels like close versus distant ancestry for me lately, like my roots versus my links. And the Greek pantheon feels more like a link for me. That is really interesting. Thank you for saying that, Lexi. Yeah, I've been amazed because like I never felt anything to the Greek thing when I was a kid, really. I thought it was interesting. But like when I was a kid, the closest ancestry I besides American, because I was just grew up with all the American stuff, was Italian because my grandparents had come from Italy. My grandmother didn't really speak English. She spoke Italian. My father was sort of proud of Italian things, and so that was the only one that like really I felt some sort of connection to. But it's been funny as I study the ancient Greeks, how I keep coming up with Italians. Like I was like, man, Pythagoras has really got me. I look him up. Oh, he's from Italy. And then Parmenides, a couple weeks ago, had really had me in a chokehold. I'm like, oh, he's from Italy. I'm like, that feels like there might be some Earth ancestry finding its way into expression in my what attracts my attention. So that's really interesting to see, Lexi, you seeing that the Greek piece is becoming more of a link for you. Hoda, I'm curious if you have anything more to say off mute about sort of the show American Gods, related to this conversation, or anything related to sort of like this process, or yeah, anything else. I feel like there's more that's rattling in you right now that I would love to hear if you're feeling in the mood. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's totally fine. I really loved how radical the conversation that you were having and just kind of like your transmission, I'd say, like how vast it got, because I'm like, yeah, I feel like that's kind of, at least for me, it's like the basis of some of the work that I do is like, I remember, like initially, like when I kind of started my brand, one of the taglines that I came up with was rewriting destiny in the hopes to kind of like spark people's imagination to kind of like go a little bit further. Um, and so when I kind of encountered American Gods, the television show, and I'm very similar to like to what you said, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to this, where like there's like material, but then there's this like tendency to want to kind of get to the meat and potatoes, like the root of the material. And sometimes like I'll just scry things, similar to like just looking at the Wikipedia page and being like, all right, what's the gist? Like just give me the real quick like 5 sentence rundown of what this is about. But I felt like American Gods was a show I needed to like engage with and really chew over some of the archetypes that presented. I think for me the most pivotal stories, and this is not a plug for the show. I mean, damn, they're not paying me, but I'm telling you, I've rewatched the show like 3 times. I think because I'm really invested. Oh, I just passed a couple of those. Oh, that's so sweet. But for me, the Odin archetype, I learned a lot about Odin's story, not only by virtue of the show, but like doing my own research after like encountering Odin. I was really interested in one of the characters in the show is known to be a leprechaun, and so I really got into like the Fae and like the stories of like Ireland. Um, there are like the American gods like Mr. World, Media, Techno Boy, which was totally both a nod and a criticism towards like the Western like obsession, I'd say, with like entertainment. And yeah, a little bit of disassociation. And oh my gosh, I mean, the show was just so riveting. I think at some point they even introduced the goddess Ostera. Kali was in there. Kali was working at a goddamn diner. And when I tell you that metaphor stuck with me, like literally, even when I meditate now, like it, and I feel like there's some sort of sense to, we were kind of talking about this in book club where like there are like thought forms around like media being like almost like evil, like demiurgic, kind of like Lexi brought in earlier. But I also feel like there's something to the root of entertainment that was different, probably at its more um, root level, that kind of relates more to like entrainment. So, in other words, like this show did that for me. Like it entrained some of the way that I see like American gods for the most part, like the way that the American logos and the Western logos, I'd say that took up space and like my astral body changed after watching that show. So again, this is not free promo because they are not paying me, but I'm like the show is it was riveting in that way, and I think it helps um media that's like chosen intentionally. I think can help with that entrainment process across time and across space, where it just gives people space to reimagine their relationship with deities. It gives people space to imagine how they um, how rationalism takes shape in their lives. So I think there's a lot of juice there, in my opinion. So thank you, Adam, for the opportunity to share and reflect that. And hey, Tiff, I'm gonna go back on mute now.
Thank you, Hoda. Um, wow. First of all, I was just laughing at like a couple of those things are just that's like Techno Boy made me laugh. And the idea of Kylie in a diner, like I just what? That's all I can say right now. Like, that's so interesting. And something about the way that you described it reminded me that something that's been in my field a lot lately, and I wonder if anyone's ever felt this way. And I feel like such an old-timey person because I want to call it moving pictures. Like motion picture, right? Like literally pictures in motion, images that are moving. I feel like this technology, I don't think we really fully grasp what this technology is or has been doing to us astrally, etherically, spiritually. Like this keeps coming up for me in my meditation, and I don't know if it's just like me projecting because I know how important movies were to me as a child, and I can feel how I can feel different now. And also, as I went to spirituality more more decidedly in the last few years, how and especially one metaphysical experience I had, it literally wiped out almost all of my desire to watch fiction. I still do, but it's much more rare. It's much more like I have to either really be into it, or it be some sort of communal thing with my wife or my daughter. Um, and I don't know why that is. It just feels connected to what you're saying about like how powerful these things are, and how I do think that like you said with rewriting destiny. I do think there's a reason why the culture war, like in the American politics, it's been fascinating how the culture war. Like I remember when I was into policy stuff, I remember being all like, "Oh, this Trump Clinton election is just about culture war. It's not about policy." You know, this I thinking I was. This is when I was still thinking I was really smart because I was into policy, right? Um, sort of bullshit intellectual sort of positioning. And until I realized that, like, no, the culture war is the war. Like, policy, it just follows culture. So, like, yeah, Trump and Clinton hurling mud at each other, that's us hurling cultural mud at each other. But the reason why I think that is in America is because we all know, and the conservatives know, and everyone knows that if you have entertainment, if you have culture, you have that's it. Because these moving pictures, these images, they're so powerful. They're so powerful. And language, which most of us, even without knowing it, get from each other, but also get from whatever is in the culture, right? We get these little phrases and turns of phrases from the TV shows and the movies and the music and the books that we read. Everything, you know, half of English is coming from King James Bible and Shakespeare, right? You know, these things are what, and as many people talk about, you know, language and the spoken word is sort of, and as Khan, right, with this mysticism of sound and music is pointing us to too. You know, the words that are said, the sounds that are made is the foundation of reality. And so yeah, if you control the narrative, as they say, you control it all. And so I do think that this feels related to like, what we're describing of like those of us in the spiritual world, um, or who really care about these things. Maybe there's more that we can be doing around storytelling than we're giving ourselves credit for, because we always want to just focus on. And I think the personal development stuff is important, and I think the community development stuff is important too. But I think they go hand in hand with, you know, new mythology, new stories that support the sort of the possibilities that we want to see. Anyway, that was another ramble, but thank you, Hoda, for sharing that about how powerful that is. And I mean, I think that's one of that's the beautiful side of media, of fiction, of story, that it can make us just feel these intense connections that we would not have found otherwise. And I think it gives spirit. If I'm going to sort of talk again, I don't know. I'm curious if anyone has something coming through them to affirm or contextualize, or I don't know, to disagree with. But I do feel like some the media and fiction, it actually gives spirit another way to point us to the things that bring aliveness. I don't think it's a I think that we are drawn towards things for reasons. And I think that these having these stories out there are a way that facilitates some spiritual alchemization and transformation by making available new archetypes, new ways of seeing, new images that can maybe replace distorted images, or that can help somehow heal a distorted image or clean an image. Um, yeah, I guess that's all I have that's coming up about that. Thank you for that affirmation. Tiff, I'm sorry, you kind of I want to get you in here. Yeah, just want to see what's up with you. And one of the questions that kind of kicked it off as always was like, were there any archetypes that were really in your field, either right now or sort of as you're looking into the new year? And so that kind of sparked a couple different conversations about the hermit and the magician, and then about sort of the ancient Greek pantheon coming up for me a lot, and how I was seeing some of it as like an opportunity. I think a lot of Western thinking rests on Greek mythology, actually. And I think if we want to, you know, fix some of the poisonous stuff that the West has done over the last several hundred years, or much more than that, but several thousand years, that maybe some of it does have to do with telling some new stories. And I was feeling like I was being drawn towards that a little bit. So that was one thing those are a couple things that came up. But anything coming up for you, Tiff?
Hello, yeah. I think like what y'all were talking about just now made me think about like the change in the Disney like animation stories. Like when I was growing up, you had like Lion King and them, and the various princesses who had some issue and then like had to get it fixed. And then like now, like I'm seeing different themes of like there was just like a bunch of movies out about like ancestral like mending ancestral like breakdowns and like young protagonists like rewriting their history sort of, or like rewriting their future instead of being stuck in the historical cycle. So you have like what, Moana, Coco, uh you know all the new ones that come out that make me cry because the parents are actually apologizing for something, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And then so yeah, that just made me think. Yeah, and Kanto, all them good ones. And so yeah, that's what that last discussion made me think about. And like thinking over my upcoming new year, I'm feeling like, yeah, there might be some hermit going around, like a really time for me to buckle down and figure out what I'm doing. But then like also I don't know, what's the one that comes right after the hermit, like when the hermit's done and about to go do something. I feel like there's a story of the arcana that I learned, and it was like that, like there's something that comes after the hermit where he's like not in the cave studying, like he's going out to do the thing. So yeah, that's where I'm at now. Like I've been hermiting since uh quarantine times, just kind of in and out, trying new things. So I feel like it's something new coming up this year. Now, like, new year, new me. That's the thing that they say every year, or like, this is my year. I feel like 2022 was my big year, but I mean, there's always room for another one. But yeah, this one is gonna. This I feel something different happening this year for sure.
Thank you so much. I love that. I love I was laughing when you said, like, "I think there's always room for another one, another big year." I love that. And thank you for pointing to that important piece of the narrative that you're right, a lot of story and the more that I thought about it as you were talking, the more that came to mind almost of these and I like also that you like very succinctly, like, parents apologizing to children. Like, if you were to just really shorten it, the amount of healing, ancestral healing that's related to that, and it and I think there's sort of like an outlet there because we know that many of us that are doing this work, you might not get that apology from your ancestors or from your parents or from your grandparents, right? From your family in real life. There's something powerful about seeing it expressed in story and allowing us to sort of feel that energy in a way of some ancestral healing that's happening. And I think you're so right that's saying something powerful about what's happening. And I do think it's related to the fact that as above, so below, that millennials, I feel like really are quite different. Like I do think every generation oh yeah, turning red is another one. Thank you. Um I think that it's another yeah, what was I'm trying sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Um Yeah, but it's really interesting to see those stories coming into existence more, and I do think it's powerful. I do. Oh yeah, I was saying that like every generation raises their kids differently, but I do feel like the millennials might that are currently raising kids, like small children. I feel like they might be one of the biggest changes that we've seen in a while in terms of how they approach this, and it's going to be really interesting to see what that looks like. And we see how Gen Z is so different and but how Gen Z also has some of the edge of Gen X because a lot of their parents are Gen X, right? And Gen Xers are very individualistic and they're very cynical. And it's really interesting to see how that kind of they're saying Gen Alpha is not fitting the usual kid stereotype. Yeah, I would be surprised if they did because in some ways it feels like I don't know, at least the way that I'm seeing with my own kid and some of the peers, I feel like there's still parents trying to, impose their beliefs, their cultural traditions. But I feel like the millennials are doing that much, much less for lots of different reasons. Some of them because they really want their child to sort of have their own way, and some of them because they don't have a firm foundation in beliefs other than just sort of the monoculture, right? Um, but it's still interesting that I think either way, I think more children in Gen Alpha are able to express a little bit more authentically than maybe prior generations where we did feel like we had to express under a certain in a certain way that conformed, right? That let us sort of not get exiled or not be treated poorly by our parents or our family or our immediate peers. And that'll be really interesting. Especially because they're Gen Alpha, like the little ones, they're not on social media as much. A little, at least the little ones, like my daughter's age, like that's like in grade school. I know because I don't know where Gen Z actually ends, but I'm talking about like those kids that haven't been had to like go into that piece yet. They're allowed to just be kids, and I do hope that that this generation is allowed to be kids longer. That's I think one of the negative things of the technology today. Um, but that's something that is also coming from a place of privilege. Uh, those of us like myself who came from a more sort of privileged background, we were able to have the innocence of a childhood. We were able to be insulated a little bit, especially someone like me that grew up sort of along with the internet age. Like the internet was like something that came into fruition more when I was like middle school, high school, right? So it was much later. Whereas if you're a child born in poverty, there's no such thing as innocence. What's innocence? At least this has not been my experience with all the folks that I've worked with in my career. There's no such thing. Like you have no choice but to age way faster than is um appropriate for a child. But there's just no choice when you grow up in poverty. You are faced with the harsh reality really fast, and you have no choice but to grow up really quick. And that's such a shame. And that's why I think these movies can be powerful too, because they let us sort of, especially with like the kind of movies we're talking about, they let us tap into an innocence that in many ways were robbed. They were plundered by these oppressive systems. And so there's yeah, that's a good word. Hoda says there, yeah, they're cathartic. Yeah, there's a catharsis, I think. Um, when there's some inner child work that's allowed when we start having fun. We're just allowed to sing songs and enjoy a movie with interesting, crazy characters and a talking frog or whatever it is. Princess and the Frog was the last one we watched, so that's what's on my mind. And I have all those. I know I got two Louisiana folks here. I got that music from Princess and the Frog in my head nonstop right now. Oh my god! Especially when I'm a human. That was what I was gonna play this morning, but I was like, it doesn't record very well. But for anyone who knows that song, I just think it's really funny because they're talking about is like alligator, almost there. That's the one my daughter is like every 5 minutes. Dad, can you put on almost there again? Can you put on almost? Yes, I can put it on again. Yes, because I'm into it too. And I keep telling her, I was like, if you like this, let's listen to some other music from Louisiana. Like this music, some of the best music that exists in America. Um, but yeah, these stories they really can be powerful. But thank you all. I just realized it was 4:30, but I want to allow a little overflow while we're talking. But yeah, these so that's another interesting element to this storytelling. So it's very fascinating. So I don't know again because I did too much of the talking today. I don't know if it's just me, but I love. Oh yes, Tiff says have a dance party to the Meteor's greatest hits any day. What? Some of the best drumming of time, all time. Um, but yeah, like I think it was interesting that so much of this container ended up coming up with sort of this idea of like rewriting stories. And I love Hoda, you talked about how one of your earliest taglines for Intrepid Bodies was rewriting destiny. Like there's some fascinating pieces with this narrative and what are ways that we can resolve some old storylines Like, I don't know if that's something I'm wondering if that's something that might be a fun thing for everyone to sit with if they're willing to. Like, are there stories? Are there myths? Are there stories that I kind of that we grew up with or that really inform our lineages that we feel like, what would it look like to play with that? What would it look like to maybe add some new scenes, add some new stories that can help resolve it, that might be able to resolve it? I think in many ways, like I was talking about with the West and ancient Greece, especially, but also I think the West is so close to Christianity. I think about the ways that in some ways Jesus, when you read those narratives, he's rewriting things as well. Now he's not really rewriting it. Now he's using language like, actually, y'all got it twisted. I'm following the law of the letter, in the way that I'm existing and living. Y'all didn't really pay attention. You said, "Oh, do not murder." Okay, I'm good as long as I don't kill someone. He's like, "No, no, you gotta look beyond that, dude. You're not supposed to have anger." He's like, "You guys were reading this way too legalistically, right?" Is what his big, I think, is what he's trying to correct. He's trying to correct what he thought was a very legalistic and sort of using clever ways to use the law to do whatever the hell you want anyway that he saw with the Pharisees. And so he was trying to kind of recreate the myths and stories of his time, revisiting the source material to help guide the reimagining, is what Tiff just said. Exactly. Exactly. And I'm feeling very convicted right now to be like, what are some of those stories in my own lineages? And particularly for some reason, I'm really thinking about the ancient Greek and Western world and American world because that's the culture I grew up in. What are some of the ways that I can go back to this source material and maybe help rewrite some stories about some of these things and what that would look like? Um, and Hoda pointed this out when I said use this word, but I think it requires audacity. I think it requires audacity. And very funny, so in that same conversation with Novo I mentioned earlier, he had never heard the term caucasity before. And so he was laughing at the term and he was like, "That's funny, I might steal that." I was like, "I did not come up with that." That term is like, it looks like it goes back maybe to 2012 is the first usage of caucasity. I'm assuming other people in this room, this container, have heard this term. Has anyone not heard the term caucasity? But I'm just curious if anyone has a definition they want to share. I could try to share mine. But it's just a combination. LOL, yeah, I used to see it on Tumblr. I'm very familiar with it, Hoda. Something tells me that there's a lot written. There's a lot that was behind those 5 words. And very familiar with it. LOL, the white audacity. Yes, the caucasity is the combination of Caucasian and audacity, and it's speaking to a very specific sort of variety of audacity, which is the Caucasian, the white audacity. And I use it with no, and I think I use it as like saying about myself, even like, yeah, I can tap into some of that caucasity. Uh, and I feel like if there's this weird birthright of caucasity as a white man that I have, can I tap in? Can I find the inspiration? Can I find the help and the refinement from my community to tap into that caucasity in a way that can somehow undo caucasity or can somehow do it for good, like by having the caucasity to rewrite the Western mythology that is at the root of so much pain and suffering of empire and colonialism and all these other things. Anyway, but thank you all revisiting this. So yeah, I'm hoping maybe this was interesting. And I'm hoping maybe you might be leaving with, hmm, are there ways that I can, as Tiff said, revisit the source material to help guide the reimagining? And as Hoda said, to help rewrite destiny. Lexi says that feels like a positive connotation to the word. I would imagine caucasity. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, like, if I have this really annoying trait, like, I might as well use it for something that could be useful. But it's true. The caucasity thing is real, though. I will just say that as a white man, there's something about, like, I feel like LOL, I see you trying to imagine it. Yeah, exactly, I'm trying to reimagine caucasity itself. But there is, like, sometimes I'll say things and I'm like, "Wow, where did I even get the nerve to say that? Dang, that's the caucasity, I guess." And so, yeah, can it be used to say the things that actually need to be said, not the things that are there to self-aggrandize, right? Or alienate, or take over, or do all these other things that caucasity has done, plunder primarily. Um, yeah. Well, I feel very, very good, and I feel very inspired to go into the new year looking at what that could look like for me. I'm hoping that this conversation sparked something within you. Maybe there's some source material that is coming up for you that feels like it's ripe for a rewrite, feels like it's ripe for a new chapter. Um, feel like it's ripe for something, and I do hope that in the new year, you were able to find those things. And Tiff, at the beginning, we said that some of the numerologists and astrological connotations, they say 2024 numerology is an 8 year, which some would say is related to Saturn. And we talked a little bit at the beginning of the Kinner about the Saturnian sort of work, right? And putting in the work, but knowing that for the sake of it, but also knowing that it comes out. And now I'm thinking of Princess and the Frog because Tiana's really big on that from her father. This idea that, like, you don't, there's no shortcuts, right? You just do the work. And so I'm hoping maybe that there's but I do feel like the work is always easier when Eros is involved, when desire is involved. So I do hope that all of you are feeling inspired. You feel like feeling like there's some things that you're able to leave behind in 2023 and maybe tap into some new things for 2024. And so I really hope that for all of you. And I want to just hold some space at the end. If anyone, I would love to hear if anyone has a takeaway or something that they're leaving with today. I'm hoping, and it's okay if it's leaving with nothing other than a laugh or whatever. But yeah, if anyone wants to share something that they might be taking away from the conversation for their benefit, I would love to hear it. Hoda says, I feel like my plate is full. Mm, mm. And what would you like to do with that full plate? Mm. And I feel inspired as fuck to take my spiritual work into a new direction. Ooh, I just felt inspired just hearing you talk about your inspiration. She said, my plate is full. Dang. I don't know why, Hoda, and I apologize. This is probably just because, like I said, I have whatever lineages and archetypes I have sitting in my mind, but something about the plate is full and feeling inspired to take my. I thought of the bread and the fish, the Jesus story of the basket. It's got just a few pieces of bread. It's a how is this enough for everyone? It is. Ashe. Yeah. Ooh. Tiff says, I'm reminded of a story from my youth that kind of sums up revisiting the history. Ah, do you want to share, Tiff? You feel free to come off mute too.
Yeah, I'll share. It's kind of short story. So basically, like, there was this grandma who was like making a ham and or like a roast or something, and she would cut like the tailbone off, or like, it's like a little handle sticking out of the hunk of meat that was like the bone. She would cut it off every time and then like bake it. And so one day the younger folks asked, why you always cut the bone off? Does it taste better? And she was like, I don't know, my grandma did it. And so then they were like, why she do it? Because her grandma did it. And then they go all the way back and they realize the first person did it because the pot was too small. Like, that's it. That was the only reason. So like moving forward, they were like, we got bigger pots. We don't have to do this work of cutting the bone off the ham, and it tastes the same. So I feel like, the idea of just being curious enough, being bold enough to question the old ways can lead you back to the source material, and then you can understand it and bring it back to your time, and it might look revolutionary and different, like you changing the game up, but you really just kind of bringing your lineage back to the truth. So that's the story.
Wow. That feels so powerful on like multiple levels. Also, the fact that it was a pot and we just recently changed the name of the server to the pot also feels very just, I don't know, beautiful. But thank you for that story. Yes. Yes. And I think, I don't know why, something about this story and the way that you told it, it's coming up for me like, this relationship with tradition, right? Where I think there can be a tendency for people to either be dogmatic about their tradition or be sort of dismissive about the tradition too. Like, young people being like, "Oh, that's old, that's elder tub. Like, what does that have to do with me, right?" Or then the opposite, like, "Well, it's everything." And something about this story feels like it really shows shows the foolishness of that kind of dualistic thinking, because I feel like it wasn't someone being dismissive, it was someone being curious about the tradition that led to this discovery of truth, that like, oh, actually the tradition is actually based on like scarcity, and we don't live in that scarcity anymore. We have a different kind of abundance now. We don't have to do the same thing unless we want to maybe set a new reason for doing it. Like, we cut the bone now to give homage to our ancestors that had a smaller pot. Like, like that. So that something about this story shows this beautiful curiosity of the tradition. And when you're really curious to find the truth, then I think a lot of new potentialities open the doors of like, what do we want this new storytelling to look like? Um, Thank you. That's such a powerful little story, and such a beautiful also example of like the kinds of things that I really wanted to come out in this container. So I'm so grateful for you, Tiff, because like this is an archetypal story, right? Right. Maybe we can maybe do something the same thing while addressing the meaning. Aha. Yes. Dang, that feels like a great note to end on. Thank you, Tiff. Thank you so much, everybody. Um, yeah, I'm just really grateful for this space. Really grateful to spend time with you all, and also really grateful for future containers across the here and future conversations in the thread in the server. To do this work, for all of us to continue to do our own piece of our inner work and our outer work, and for us to do this collective work of reimagining and you know really creating story that works, that works for the time, for our current context, and it brings healing and brings us hopefully closer so that we can be that bridge between earth and cosmos, between all the things. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening if you are staying up and celebrating, or at least kind of watching the ball drop and doing that thing, or just kind of taking it easy, being with yourselves, having a party. I love, we talked about the hermit. The hermit is definitely alive in this container. And so that might be the vibe today. And so enjoy that. Enjoy that. But no matter what, I look forward to spending more time with you all and doing more work and doing more dreaming and doing more um, soulful conversation and generative dialogue in the new year. So have a wonderful time, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you all. Thank you.